So under the this one makes it Welcome. Wonderful to see you all here today as part of our annual Colorado Religious Community Day celebration.
Special thanks to the Colorado Saints Chorale for that beautiful and stirring music. My name is Elder Rick Wally. I'm representing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I have the honor of conducting our program here today. Welcome to our many friends representing the diverse faith communities of our state, as well as elected officials who join us today in our celebration. Begin an opening prayer by Imam Shafi Abdul Aziz of the Islamic Outreach Center of Colorado.
Assalamu alaikum, may peace of God be with you. Allow me to say a few words. If you wanna understand my English, that is part of religious freedom, diversity, understanding each other. And so, religion is God's. Religion freedom reminds us about the love, mercy, and blessings of God upon His creation. We are reminded about our bond, about our personal relationship with the Creator, who brought us from nothing to existence. Religion plays a role of helping us to realize the right of the Creator upon us and our rights upon the Creator. And it also helps us to understand, protect, and even advocate for our rights towards one another as creations. Religion helps us to separate between right and wrong. It helps us to be there for one another. Religion helps us to enjoy and celebrate diversity without imposing your faith on others. It reminds us that we are one. It helps us that racism should not exist. Oppression should not exist. Segregation, slavery should not exist. It is only through religion that we are reminded that we are individually and collectively free, that we can express our opinions, even though we may differ, but we differ with love. And I'm going to put the last verse, then I will be praying. God the Almighty says, in fact, 2 verses, in Quran chapter 17, verse 7T. So I said you should tolerate my English. I say 7T. I didn't swallow T. God the Almighty says in Quran, oh mankind, God says that indeed, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Arabic. Indeed, we have dignified and honored all mankind. وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. And we made them to live in the sea and in the land. This is a freedom that God has given you, not any government, not any human being. وَرَزَقْنَاهُمْ مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ. And we have also added this human being of the creation with additional blessing, which is God provided us with the best provision. وَفَضَّلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْنَا تَفْضِيلًا. And we have given this mankind preference above all that God created. The last verse, God says in Quran chapter 49, verse 13, that, O mankind, verily I created you from a single soul, Adam, and then I created from Adam his wife. When we talk about the story of Adam and Eve, it reminds us that regardless of your color, regardless of your status, regardless of what you have economically, a family, it's not the color, it's what is in our heart, it's how we behave towards one another, it's how we treat one another, it's how we tolerate one another, it's how we are there to help one another. So God says that He created us from what we are one family, and He made us to exist in different nations and tribes just to know each other for identity. Not to say that I'm better than you and you're better than me, no. And the most honorable in the sight of God is, it depends on your behavior, how righteous, how pious, how beneficial you are to others. Verily, Allah is all aware of what we are doing, and He is all knowledgeable of what we are doing. Having said that, I'm happy to be invited here. Please let us pray. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, Allah, the beneficent, the merciful. O our Lord and Creator, our Sustainer, the all-loving, God who is the all-merciful, have mercy on us. We ask for your guidance. We are all lost, and no one guides except you, O Allah, God the Almighty. So we are asking you today to guide us, guide our country, guide our leaders, guide our children, guide our women, guide our men, guide the world. Oh God, help us to reconcile, grant us peace, grant us justice. Oh God, help us to realize that we as coexisting beings, we are social beings, and we cannot live in isolation regardless of our faith, regardless of our understanding of this life. Connect our hearts, grant us love, grant us mercy again, guide us to do the right thing, guide our leaders, especially religious leaders, guide our politicians to make right decisions and to do the right thing, guide our countries, make people to benefit from our role as religious leaders, help us to benefit people, grant us good life in this world, grant us good life tomorrow hereafter, save us from punishments in this world and tomorrow hereafter, admit us in paradise. In your name we pray, O Allah, walhamdulillah, rabbil alameen. All praise be to God, the Lord of the worlds. Amen.
Thank you, Mansa. Freedom of speech and worship, freedom of speech and freedom of worship are two pillars of our American democracy. These rights can be abused when people exploit religious language to create division and fear. Today, we're happy to present a wonderful group of faith leaders to talk about how religion serves as a healing force in our community. After our formal program, we will have a few question and answers in a panelist format. We'll now hear from Rabbi Karen Aviv, Rabbinic and Program Director at Judaism Your Way. She will be followed by Stephen T. Collis, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a law professor specializing in law and religion. He will then be followed by Charles S. Guilford III, Executive Pastor at the Potter's House of Denver and Deputy Director of Council Relations and Special Projects for the Denver Mayor's Office. And then we'll be pleased to hear from Jeff Hunt, Director of the Centennial Institute at Colorado Christian University.
So good morning. Thank you for being here, and thank you to all the organizers of this event. My name is Rabbi Karen Aviv. This week, Jews and our loved ones are celebrating Passover around the world, where we retell the dramatic Exodus narrative from the Torah, which is also known as the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. In this foundational story, Moses and his brother Aaron confront the oppressive Pharaoh of Egypt on behalf of the Israelites who are enslaved. They cry out many times, "Let my people go." Only after 10 terrible plagues that destroy crops and create intense suffering and grief does Pharaoh finally relent. The enslaved Israelites scramble to pack their belongings, and they, along with a mixed multitude of many Egyptians who do not support Pharaoh's regime, they run for their lives. Even after the Israelites flee into the desert, they are not yet fully free. Throughout the rest of their journey to the Promised Land, when confronted with challenges, they express fear and not a little bit of anxiety. They forget how far they've come in their spiritual journey, and they wonder whether it would have been better to go back to enslavement. They complain. In Yiddish, we call that kvetching. And they question the capability of their leaders, and they cry out to the divine. So it takes 40 years of wandering on an epic road trip through the desert to understand the relationship between becoming free and healing from the trauma of enslavement. What the Israelites also learn along the way is that freedom and healing means responsibility to one another. In fact, one of my favorite teachings from the Talmud is Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Laze, which means all people who wrestle and dance with the divine are responsible for one another. Freedom also comes with the responsibility to be in right relationship with the divine source, and responsibility for being in right relationship with the earth and its many inhabitants. Indeed, when the Israelites received 10 teachings at Mount Sinai, in Hebrew it's called Aseret HaDibrot, these teachings are largely all about how to be in right relationship with one another, to create a society that is both compassionate and just. So I think this Passover narrative resonates deeply with the historical moment in which we find ourselves today. During Passover, it's customary to ask 4 questions about why are these nights different from all other nights? So I'm going to pose 4 questions to all of us today that speak to this moment in our country's evolving relationship with freedom and responsibility. Question 1. How might the past 2 years of living through the terrible plague of COVID help us remember that we are all connected? COVID has taught us that we all have responsibility to do our part so that everyone can experience the freedom to be safe and healthy and breathe easily. Question number 2. How might we create a more just and compassionate society where people of all spiritual traditions, of all ethnic and racial backgrounds can feel fully free to live and pray with safety and security, without fear of being run down in our homes, our schools, and especially for Jews today, our houses of worship? Question number 3. How might we create a more just and compassionate society where people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, of all socioeconomic backgrounds, can earn a just and equitable living wage and have access to the resources that we all need to live a full and fulfilled life? And question number 4. How might we balance our desire for unfettered freedom of expression with a sense of deep care and responsibility for one another that protects and strengthens and heals our very fragile democracy? I don't have any answers to these questions. However, I do pray that we can develop the skills of empathy and compassion and deep listening to care enough to seek these answers together. May we cultivate the ability to sit with our discomfort in hard conversations. May we expand our vision and our consciousness in asking important questions across those deep differences. And most importantly, may we stay in right relationship with each other, especially when we have difficult conversations, or when we're trying to create public policy, or when we reach different conclusions about how to address our country's most pressing questions. This is my prayer. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for those wonderful remarks, and thank you so much for having me here. I'm grateful to be here. As was said, I'm a law professor at the University of Texas, where I'm a faculty director at the Beck Lofton First Amendment Center, and I specialize in religious liberty law. I'd like to, if I could, tell you a story about a friend of mine. He is not just a friend, he's also a mentor. He, for the better part of the last 45 years, has been the leading scholar of religious liberty law in the country. And along the way, many scholars of various types of law often get involved in litigation as well. And this particular professor has represented a number of religious organizations over the years, and he's really been probably the most influential voice on religious liberty law in the United States since arguably the 1980s. And over the course of his career, he was accused of being whatever religion he happened to be representing at the time, over and over again. But he refused to ever say what his own religious beliefs were. So he just kind of let the accusations be out there. But he always felt that his views on religious freedom should not be determined by his own religious beliefs. They should be independent of that. And so for decades, he refused to ever say it. Finally, a group of people convinced him to actually write about what his own religious beliefs are. And I'm going to read to you something that he wrote. So here you have this champion of religious freedom. He's known for protecting people of all these different faiths and backgrounds. And then he writes this in a particular scholarly article. So I want to emphasize what I'm about to read is not my language for those walking in. This is the language of this professor. He writes this. He says, "I am agnostic about matters of religion. None of the claims of the world's religions seems to me either plausible or falsifiable. I am inclined to think that humans create God in their own images, and that knowing nothing whatever of God, most people impute to God those traits they think an attractive God should have." So as you might expect, this came off as a bit of a bombshell to people. And it begs the question, how did someone like that become a champion of religious freedom, and in particular, religious free exercise? He went on to explain that when he started out in his career, he was very much anti-religious, and in particular, anti-organized religion. He started off as someone who was going to work as a scholar to really kind of attack religion. And he talks about how many secular thinkers like himself are also similarly hostile towards religion. But then he goes on to say this, and this is important, so let me quote from him again. He says, "I went through my period of hostility to theistic religion, went through my period of stick-figure caricatures of believers, and I learned better. I learned that highly intelligent and accomplished people are devout believers. Indeed, they believe that they have personally experienced the presence of God. I learned that believers reason just as well as non-believers on average, and that most believers do not see the conflict between faith and reason that many secularists posit. I learned that religious faith is a powerful force for good in the lives of many believers. I learned that the great religious traditions often embody an accumulated wisdom, whatever its sources." He then goes on to explain that the way he developed this respect for religion and religious believers came from his frequent contact with sophisticated believers. So now let me shift off him for a little bit. And I find today that there are many people who have a hostility towards religion, and oftentimes that hostility is born of a lack of opportunity to experience all the good that religion does. They don't have the experience that this professor had. And there's a reason for that. Part of it is that they're not looking for it. They're hostile to religion, and so they look for evidence to support their hostility, which is a mistake most of us fall into. Cognitive psychologists have actually shown that most of us have a gut reaction about something, and then we just reason backwards from that and look for evidence to support our gut reaction. action. So that they're falling into that trap, which is a common human mistake. But there's another reason they don't see the good of religion. Just this last summer, I was at a conference at the University of Notre Dame for all of the law and religion scholars in the country. And there was a panel of journalists set up. And these were the premier journalists in the world. So you had folks from the New York Times, the Atlantic, NPR, various other major outlets. And at one point, one of the journalists, I won't say which one of the journalists said, you know, it's not my job to report about all the good that religion is doing. And it's not my job to report about religious groups working together in harmony. My job is to report all the flaws in the world and where things are going bad. So, be that as it may, fair enough. The result is the narrative that most people are getting from major media is the problems, right? They're only learning about when negative things happen, and they're not hearing about all the good occurring in the world. So, with respect to the media out there, I'm going to try to fill that gap today just a little bit in the time I have remaining to emphasize some of the good that is coming from religion in our society. This is not to suggest that folks who have no religion are not also doing good. I don't want anyone to interpret my comments to mean that. But if there's going to be a gap in the media coverage of all the good that is happening, then I'd like to take this opportunity to fill that gap, especially given the theme of today's meeting. So let me just give you just a few statistics. I'm a professor after all, so we like facts, supposedly. Listen to some of this. Faith-motivated volunteers comprise the largest percentage of volunteers in rehabilitation efforts in the United States prisons. Almost 60% of the emergency shelter beds for homeless individuals in the U.S. are provided through faith-based organizations. Religious schools teach over 3 million children each year in the United States, and religious hospitals care for 20% of U.S. hospital patients. 74% of all charitable giving in the United States goes through explicitly religious organizations, and 40 out of the 50 of America's top charities are faith-based. To just give you one example, Catholic Charities works in 115 countries with 2,130 local partners to improve the lives of 140 million people on an annual basis. And it's not just organizations that are doing good, religious organizations that are doing good, it's at the individual level. So here are a few other facts for you. Religiously active individuals give financially more and more often to both religious and secular causes. Religious people are 23% more likely to volunteer their time. And they don't just volunteer that time to religious causes. Members of religious organizations are more than twice as likely as others to participate in non-religious community organizations as well. And finally, religious families adopt children at more than twice the rate as non-religious families. So, my friends, I want to emphasize again, my goal is not to compare religious people with non-religious people, but to emphasize all the good that is happening. And those facts I just gave you were just a sliver of what I could. The organizers today told me I'm only allowed to talk for 5 minutes. They're also the facts that scholars can get their hands on, that they can actually do studies about. There are millions and millions of hours being spent by religious people ministering to one another, helping one another. We just had a tornado blow through our town in Texas and completely wipe out the home of a man completely unaffiliated with our church. And within 24 hours, our entire youth group was there, helping him rebuild his home. That will never get reported on in the media. But those types of good charitable acts are occurring every single day in our country because of religion and the faith that motivates people. And they are allowed to do it here in the United States because of religious freedom. And my hope is that it will never be that way. Thank you.
That's very gifted. So. Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to be here. As mentioned, my name is Charles Guilford III. I serve as Director of Regional Affairs in the Mayor's Office, but in this context, I serve as the Chair of the Mayor's Faith Council. So I get to work with our faith communities all across Denver. So just want to extend greetings on behalf of the Mayor of Denver. Just thanking you all for your continued engagement coming off of the pandemic and any number of other crises that have impacted our nation. The faith community stood up the loudest, the largest, the strongest to make sure that we were able to be cared for and transformed because of the spirit of good
injustice that exists in these communities. So just wanted to say thank you for that. Now, it's a real unfortunate thing we have 4 ministers who are going to be taking the podium because this extends your timeline, so I promise to be brief. With that being said, something came up. So I wrap it up, my blood sugars as well. So to that end, I really wanted to speak to you all from a whole host of thoughts, and I don't want to overlap, but when we think of religious freedom, we have to jump back to 1791 when the Bill of Rights were first established. Now, I'm not a law professor, so I want to make sure I'm checking and make sure that this is correct. But the 2 important things that we can really understand and receive from this is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the exercise thereof. And this breaks down into 2 types of bodies. There's the Establishment Clause and Free Exercise Clause. And while these things are important, we can get into the legality and all the things that I know you're thrilled to learn very deeply about because you're on your second round of coffee. The more important thing for us to discuss today in terms of religious freedom is the fact that we get to practice what we believe. And the power of religion in this context and compared to other places across our country is so powerful because we have the freedom to be able to express our understanding of God if we recognize God in that kind of context. Now, when we think about the Bill of Rights, we think about it in terms of legal parameters. But we also forget, unfortunately, that our founders wrote such words such as, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, and that they have certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What's important to understand about that is that the framework of our country, framework of our nation, was anchored in something higher than legality. It was anchored in the belief that there is an intrinsic and innate value that we have that is divine. And so when we come around our National Freedom Day, it's important to recognize the reality and the impact of that truism. That if we are made in the imago Dei, the image and the likeness of God, then when I see you, I see the face of God. When I see you, I see the face of God. And implicit to that, there's something to love about you, and there's something to love about me. As I conclude, now some of you have been in a tradition, when you hear that, you know that this is about the first of about 4 that's about to take place. I promise not to be just 3. But as we prepare to conclude, these sacred halls that impact our country, impact our state, I want to raise that conversation as our founders did, a little bit higher, in the sense that when you look at Jesus, who's in the course of the conversation with this individual who asked him one question, Jesus, who is my neighbor? That conversation shifts rapidly from a moral ethic into a legal parameter with amendments and friendly amendments and certain clauses concerning who is defined as my neighbor. Jesus takes this conversation a little bit higher in that he focuses on not trying to get into who and what, and rather to anchor us in the truism again that all of us have a responsibility to each other, because there's a distinction between those who keep the law and those who practice love. And my encouragement to us as we move forward from today, recognizing religious freedoms, is that love will be our continued and supreme ethic. That there are people out there who recognize a whole host of things, but may not recognize, as was so eloquently shared, what's good in the world as opposed to what's bad. When I think of religious freedom, I think of periods of time in our history where we had to confront things and change things. When I think of religious freedom, I think of a Baptist minister in the South in the 1960s who began to espouse words, things like the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I think of a man who interlocked with Jewish brothers and sisters and Muslim brothers and sisters and began to cross a bridge called Selma, locking an arm against one thing that stood in the way of what was most intrinsic and true, which is the reality that all of us have value in the eyes of God and therefore have values inside of society itself. So as I conclude for the second time, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your continued support of this incredible community. Thank you for those who advocate for religious freedom. Because without the religious freedom that we have, while we may have government, constitutions, charters, things of that nature, what most important about this nation is the soul that we have of this nation. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. And that being said, hug somebody. I'm kidding, right? This didn't become that church service. So you got real nervous. Like, you've been to that church service as introverts, like, I don't want to talk to people, right? But in that same vein, I would charge you with the passive, finding one person today that you could be an expression of love and recognize that religious freedom has far more to do with what we do to impact the lives of others, in addition to the rights that are afforded to us. God bless you all.
Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to join you and welcome you to your capital here in Denver, Colorado. Religious Freedom Day is so important, and we are so excited as a society to be able to celebrate this here in the halls, the hallowed halls of our democracy. Bringing together people of all faiths standing united in defense of religious freedom, freedom of worship. It's a principle that our country was founded upon. A place of refuge for people who face religious discrimination in areas across the world. It's in many ways what brought my own great-grandparents to these shores, religious discrimination in Eastern Europe and Russia, and of course the ability to freely practice here in the United States. One of the great things about the state of Colorado in particular is our diverse and varied perspectives, geographic and faith, all different kinds of folks with different belief systems able to learn from one another here in Colorado. So, for all of us, whether you're Christian or Jewish or Sikh or Mormon or Buddhist or Muslim or any other religion, we want to make sure that you know that you belong in Colorado and we welcome you in Colorado for all. And we celebrate people of every faith in our state. There's a great theme that could be more appropriate. Religion is a healing force in our community. Certainly it was religion that helped and faith and helped many people get through the very difficult last 2 years. And we were proud to work with faith leaders here in Colorado to make sure they had the tools to maintain safety and be able to gather safely in person ahead of most other states. And I really never ceased to be amazed at the generosity of Coloradans, many driven by their faith traditions, neighbors delivering meals to people down the street, individuals donating their time and their effort to make our state better, more beautiful, more sustainable. This value of healing is really embedded in who we are as Coloradans. And it takes all of us representing the great diversity of faiths that exists in our state to inform our own actions, to guide and to inspire all of us to greater things. I prepared a proclamation that I will read for you about this Religious Freedom Day that goes as follows. Whereas both the United States Constitution and the Constitution of the state of Colorado affirm the right of all citizens to freely exercise their religious faith without persecution. Whereas well-defined religious liberties work to secure other liberties through vigorous public debate where all participants may exercise such influence as their ideas and values might engender. Whereas Colorado's churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, monasteries, and other houses of worship support neighborhoods, strengthen families, heal the effects of physical and emotional challenges in our community. Whereas all citizens of Colorado benefit from an active and diverse faith landscape where they respect each other's deeply held beliefs. And whereas Colorado has celebrated Religious Freedom Day since 2019 to encourage residents to honor and discuss the positive contributions of faith communities and to reflect on the values seeking common ground between faiths and also those who profess no faith. Therefore, I, Jared Polis, Governor of the state of Colorado, do hereby proclaim April 21st, 2022 as Religious Freedom Day. So I want to wish you all a happy and successful Religious Freedom Day, bringing the celebration that we can never take for granted, freedom of religion in our country here to our state's capital. And I want to join you in celebrating, remembering that we always need to protect the religious freedoms that we enjoy in Colorado and in the United States of America. Thank you.
Being with us today. We're grateful for your leadership here in Colorado. We would like to still hear from Jeff Hunt.
Well, howdy, friends. I'll tell you a quick story about Governor Polis. We hosted him at the Western Conservative Summit. That's an event that I hosted. As you can imagine from the name, it's a little different than some of the policies that he may normally espouse. And it was kind of a record deal. It was a historic deal. It was the first time we had an elected Democrat come out to the Western Conservative Summit. And there's a lot of questions about what's going to happen, how's Money going to respond, how's he going to respond. We have everybody in the same room together. And he walks out and he starts his speech off great. He goes, I'm a little confused. My staff told me I was going to the Western Conservation Summit. And so we kind of have these moments. I do want to applaud LDS leadership for creating a good ecumenical moment. We don't have moments like this. If you're not familiar with who I am and what we do, I represent the conservative public policy think tank at Colorado Christian University. So in many ways, I'm kind of like inviting Colorado's version of Mike Pence to follow Colorado's governor, Jared Polis. So kudos to you guys. This is great. So the theme today is religion as a healing force in our community. What needs healing in our community? Well, as the guy who works in public policy for Colorado Christian University, our public policy needs healing. It's very divisive right now. No, it's not as bad as it's been in the past. We're not engaged in a civil war, but it's not easy going. And you a lot of times feel like we're really kind of yelling at each other in public policy. And I think that's in part due to the fact that we're losing religion in our communities. America is going through a historic decline in religious commitment. We have fewer people attending church than ever before in this country's history. And in many ways, this was supposed to bring us more peace. Right? There was a song written by the famous Beatle, John Lennon, who wrote this: imagine there's no conscience. It isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. It's kind of this projection. If we just got rid of religion, well, then everything would get a lot more peaceful. Problem was, we took all that fervor that we typically put into religion and we put it into politics. With an important caveat: without the scriptural guidance to love and serve those that we have differences with. So you have all this energy, you have all this passion poured into politics to win at all costs. So why does scripture matter in this issue? Well, we just went through Easter weekend. We may have people that we disagree with. I was down here a lot the last few weeks fighting for the sanctity of life. It's the most important issue to me. We were down here until 4 or 5 a.m. multiple nights a week. Very, very important. How does scripture guide our political engagement? Well, we just went through Easter weekend. And even though I have people I disagree with, I don't necessarily consider them enemies, but Jesus calls me to think deeply about how I would respond to enemies, not just people I disagree with, but to my own enemies. Think about Jesus washing Judas' feet. Powerful image, the man who would betray him. He heals the ear of the Roman soldier who was cut off by Peter. The Roman soldier was about to arrest him. He asked God to forgive those that had crucified him. We have a hard time loving a person we have political disagreements with, but in Matthew 5:43-48, Jesus tells us how we should treat those that we have very deep differences with. You've all heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? We're not even the tax collectors doing that. And if you greet only your own people, what are you to do more than others? Do not even pagans do that. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. You see, Scripture doesn't call us to lessen our priorities or commitment to principles we fight for, we're passionate about. Scripture doesn't call us to get rid of that, but it calls us to layer on top of that a commitment to love, pray, and serve those that we have differences with. So in public policy, in our modern climate, you take away that, well, politics is just going to get more vitriolic. We're going to end up with more division, we're going to end up with more hatred. So the question before us is religion a healing force for our community? It's not just a healing force, it's a critical healing force for a community, especially for those that work down here trying to achieve things. We have to have those scriptures to guide us in how we interact with each other and how we relate to each other, how we seek to achieve our goals. So to our host, thank you so much for hosting us and putting this together. Let's keep this project going. We don't have enough of these. And let's keep religion central to the work of public policy in the state. Thank you all so much.
Thank all those that have spoken to us today. We're grateful for them. Special thanks to Governor Polis for joining us. I'll remind you that following the closing prayer that there will be a question and answer period that you're all welcome to stay for. Let me thank all of you as well for coming and being a part of this wonderful day. Our friend Dilpreet Jammu of Colorado Sikhs will now give us the closing prayer.
Thank you. So my wife and I moved to Douglas County in the summer of 1994. 28 years ago, I still remember the first time we went to pray. Our Gurdwara, our house of worship, was set up in a restaurant in a small strip mall, and the tables and chairs were stacked on one side. It was beautiful because this small gathering in Colorado was an expression of the amazing power of religious freedom. I believe that Guru Nanak Dev Ji, the founder of my faith, put forth the elements of a just society. Think of truth, equality, compassion, service, and religious freedom. These are all common values that we traditionally hold. Our beliefs include faith and meditation in the name of one creator, ensuring justice for the benefit of all humankind. So the closing prayer today is actually an opening prayer. And it is the first prayer that we teach our children. It is called the Moon Mantra. It's only 8 words long and was composed by Guru Nanak, our founder. I choose it because religious freedom is a process. It does not end, and each of us in this room has a part to play. The Moon Mantra is found on the first page of the Guru Granth Sahib. To my knowledge, our scriptures is the only scripture that begins with a number. That number is 1. I will speak the original language and then translate it to English. And I believe many of you may recognize some of the thoughts that I speak. Please center your mind as you would in your tradition. Let's take a deep breath. Ik Om God, one God manifest in creation. Sat Nam, your name is truth. Karta Put, you the creator, the doer. Nirbhav, without fear. Nirvad, without enmity, only love. Akar Murid, immortal being. Ajuni Sadham, without birth, self-existence. Guru Prasad, realized by grace of the one who moves us from darkness to light. So as you go forward with your day, it is my sincere hope that you will use the immense power of this precious life, this human body that you have today, to help heal our world. Thank you, and God bless.
It is no small task to get on the schedule really soon, sit before you. And if you don't mind, before we go into our brief panel discussion, we give them just another round of applause and appreciation. We've had several ask that all these prepared remarks are delightful. That we have missed an opportunity not to allow our speakers to share some thoughts relative to the consideration we've got as a theme this year, which is the healing force of faith-based organizations in our society. And as we start off, I'm just going to go down the road here, starting with our good friend Charles. And let him comment just on an initial comment from his seat. And then the others who prepare a comment may also do that. And I've got basically a half a dozen questions that were prepared and submitted that we wanted just to give our speakers a moment to respond to. So, Charles, as we consider the role that religion plays as an agent of repair and reconciliation, how our faith-based community is that accomplished?
Quickly, that's such a great question. As mentioned in my comments, our faith communities are responsible and frankly care for the soul of our nation, of our country. And what's really been powerful to see, particularly in this time period that we're in, is this notion of grace and forgiveness, and really being able to afford people the opportunity to be human, to afford people the opportunity to be able to express and understand whether it be different perspectives, or frankly to understand a role that they can play in making an impact on the lives of other people. I had the privilege of serving as a site director for the house initiatives that we had during COVID. So we had about 750 gentlemen staying at the National Western Complex, about 150 women at the Coliseum. And it was really interesting, people who had not been engaged with our house community before coming to work and support at the site, and the initial assumptions or biases even, or just thoughts and understandings limited as they may have been, including myself, that folks had in that space. What was really powerful is through the power of the Salvation Army, again, a faith-based organization, and then Denver Restoration, again, another faith-based organization, providing an opportunity for service. And I think that's where our faith communities really stand strong, is being engaged in service themselves. But I think the opportunity that we have is affording people who may not share immediately, our faith, or may not share our faith at all, an opportunity to serve in those kind of contexts with the kind of virtues and the kind of values, precepts that we have. I don't mean trying to proselytize and all that kind of stuff, because that's a separate conversation between them and the Lord, assuming that they recognize that. But us as a community showing our service and giving them an opportunity to serve it for no other purpose other than to breathe one word, which is compassion.
Anyone else? All right, Karen, what are your thoughts about it? You bet. We're here for you. What role can religion play as an agent of repair and reconciliation in our community?
That's a really big question. Jews are such a teeny tiny minority in the United States that most of our effort to help one another actually goes to people who are not of our spiritual tradition. So, for example, Jewish Family Service, which is the largest Jewish social service agency in Denver County, 98% of the people that receive aid and assistance and help are not Jewish. And that, I think, is a testimony to the heart of the Torah. In Leviticus, in Hebrew, it's "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." Love your fellow human being the way that you want to be loved. So what drives Jewish action towards healing and reconciliation and repair and community building is really reaching out across different communities and not just helping our own people. And I think we would be well served to do that in every spiritual community.
Thank you so much. Jeff, could you comment on this question for us? How can faith leaders promote civility and kindness in our community? What sorts of things are available to them, and what sorts of things have you observed in our faith community as they promote civility and kindness?
Yeah, and to that point, it's a really important question, because the nature of kind of political media, which is what we do. No, we're not involved in campaigns or getting anybody elected in ideas, but the advancement of ideas from a faith perspective in this spot, or in the public square, is naturally going to be fed, right? So if they were passing laws down here on how great the sunshine is in the state of Colorado, nobody would be down here. They would go. But it's the fact that we have differences of opinion, passionate differences of opinion. And I think the call is not to water that down. It is to find ways through it, even if it's uncomfortable. So what's the call of the Bible, from our perspective, is that yes, it's uncomfortable. It's not easy. I mean, it's not just civility, it's how you give to the poor. You're supposed to sell everything you own and give to the poor. That's not easy. It feels uncomfortable. You have to sit there. Christ is calling us to something even bigger than what I'm dealing with right now and today. And this is the same case with civility. And so we may have our differences. We're trying to advance an agenda. Our agenda is based on our faith. It's very personal to us. But we have to, as leaders, reflect civility and how we do that. Because, gosh, especially on the political stage, right now, you are rewarded by how hard you fight. And this is on both sides. On both sides, you get more donations, you get more airtime, you get more support, the harder you fight. And I think it's important for people of faith to go, we were called to, not to get rid of those, we were called to higher things, which include civility, compassion, and not even that. The Bible says that you got to love, serve, and pray those you disagree with. That's way higher than just being civil. So welcome to being uncomfortable.
Thanks, Jeff. Steve, could you share your thoughts? We appreciate the insights. Everyone that I've spoken to here that has heard you speak anytime you give a presentation, we all have our iPhones out taking notes like crazy because the clarity with which you speak to us has been very, very helpful and all around the country. So thank you. Could you speak to the question of, as we enjoy our religious freedoms, what response, and I know you deal with a lot of organizations, but as individuals, in your mind, dealing in this space constantly, what is our responsibility as individuals in making sure that we are not only taking advantage of our exercise of our faith, but how do we make sure that others are able to worship as they choose? How do we support our fellows in different faith groups?
That's a great time. Can you hear me? Yeah. First off, let me say, being from Texas, I will never oppose not from Texas. Not that I live in Texas, I'll never oppose a giant cowboy hat. Keep it up. I live in Texas. To answer the question, I think that when we think about religious freedom, we're often talking about what happens when things go wrong. How does the Constitution or various statutes, how do they protect us when things go wrong? And in an ideal world, things would never go wrong. In other words, all of us would be looking for ways to protect one another in our religious exercise. And all of us would be looking for ways not trying to use the government to force our religious beliefs or ideologies on other people. And if we were all doing that, especially government officials, we really wouldn't need to invoke the Constitution or these various statutes. And I'll just give you an example that I was talking about with Jeff this morning. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the governor's office of Minnesota just shut down the entire state, everything, right? Really, it was just you could go to the grocery store, make the hospital, we could do anything. You couldn't go to church. And about 3 months into it, when people started to realize that the virus wasn't as bad as we initially thought, we were seeing the horrible footage coming out of Italy, the governor issued a new executive order backing off the restrictions a little bit, and it was was interesting. His orders allow concerts and movie theaters to meet at 50% capacity so people can social distance, but it still kept churches closed. And the Catholic diocese and some other religious groups sent him a letter saying, you can't do that, right? Religious gatherings pose the exact same risk as people meeting in a movie theater or at a concert. And this is the important part. This is what I talked about that doesn't get reported in the news. The governor of Minnesota got that letter and immediately said, you know what? You're right. That was an oversight. And he fixed it and allowed churches to open up again. When we as citizens are looking out for one another's religious needs, when we're not trying to use government to force our religious ideologies on one another, then we don't need to invoke the law. We don't need to rely on the Constitution. That requires us to do the hard work of being good citizens and good neighbors.
That's perfect, thank you. We've got just a couple of other questions. We're not going to assign, we're just going to let you speak extemporaneously. That's pressure. And we don't put silence after these questions. So how do we counter the perception that faith has become an instrument of division in our communities? How do we counter that perception by some faith as an instrument of divisiveness and division in our community? Now let's let you speak, whoever has the thought first.
I think first off, what I mentioned in my remarks, so the media is not going to promote all the good that faith is doing for us. And they don't see that as their job. Their job is to find problems and point out problems. So you can't assume that all good is going to be promoted. So I think we can all do make a better effort of getting that good out there. And helping people see all the good that's happening. Simple posts on Facebook instead of posting something you're angry about. Maybe post about how thankful you are for the service you receive and so on. Wonderful experience you had at your church. That's the first thing. And the second thing I'll say is, let's never be the caricatures that people are assuming, often falsely assuming that we are. We need to be living our religions and acting as a level that inspire others often to see the good in our faith and never stooping down to them that then gives them ammo to attack the religion of faith.
Anyone else?
Could you repeat the question one more time?
So how do we counter the perception in the community held by some that faith has become an instrument of division and divisiveness in the broader community? How do we help counter that perception?
I wholeheartedly agree with his comments regarding the role of media in terms of that perception. But I think where we have an opportunity is to, first of all, check ourselves in that perception. One of the things that I would really have to keep government more so. I'm sorry, that was personal. We're going to edit that out to take. One of the things I've had to do is realize that there's real people out there, and a whole host of real people who are being left out of the conversation. A whole host of people who are not represented, in stories and headlines, and that's the beauty of kind of that pastoral responsibility is to again not neglect the flock of the sheep for the report of whatever could be coming out, and recognize that we have an opportunity every single day to engage. I would say the best way that we combat that is first of all to give people the freedom to disagree without there being consequences. I'm a believer, a real best Christian, but along, as Unitarian Universalist, so I have a whole different background and experience in such a liberty in one context, and assume this lens or this political view or this ideology, and to remove the dignity of our humanity. And I think that's where religion we have and our communities have incredible opportunities to dignify who we are as individuals, rather than to try to shift back to or fall back to this kind of more tribalistic, kind of approach that people have. It's the curiosity that we see from my faith that we see Jesus sitting down with women at a well and asking questions, rather than assuming that we have the answer or that we are the answer.
Thank you. We have Runaway Karen and Jeff just take just a moment and give us your thoughts on that same question, how we help counter that perception that faith has become an instrument of division, and how we can maybe help mitigate that perception.
There's a foundational concept in Judaism called grace, which means a sacred relationship. And it typically talks about the relationship between the people of Israel and the divine, the Torah. But I think what's more important is that it's relevant for people of any spiritual lot of Jews really wrestle with that idea and don't feel it. We use the idea of belonging and behavior to frame Jewish action. In any case, the whole idea of a sacred commitment or a sacred relationship is based on your behavior, like your actions. And the word for that is mitzvah. Many people have heard the word mitzvah, and people translate it as good deed. I think it's deeper than that. It's really about right action, and it's about showing how you care about a sacred relationship through your actions, through ethical behavior. So, if everybody who identified as part of a faith community or a spiritual community were in alignment between what your most sacred commitments are, that are reflected in your behavior, in your mitzvot, I think we have better PR in the community, that religion can be a force of common good, and it can be a force of healing.
Thank you. Jeff, do we have a review for you? You got your thoughts
No, I got my thoughts. I do think religion is a form of division because there are really strong personal beliefs that you can't get rid of that. You can't go, we can all get together and sing from Bayah and everything's going to be fine. We have important differences. And at the same time, we've got to be able to learn to live together. We were talking about this morning, I had it on my radio show. And I think Catholics and Protestants probably especially do this. We went to war with each other for 300 years. And so there's a part of me that goes, you know what, if it's all about my faith getting total control, well, then their faith's going to get total control, and I'm not going to like that. So there's a bit of a reality check. So what we're asking for is not that everyone papers over the differences. We have important differences. This was something I really appreciated at Colorado Christian University recently. We host debates, really passionate debates. We hosted a debate on whether or not reparations are necessary to bring about racial reconciliation. Not a light topic, a critical topic. And we got everybody together, passionate debate, and we were able to leave together and share those differences. And I think we just lost that as a culture. It's kind of a zero-sum game. I've got to win. They've got to lose. I've got to be in control. Well, when they get in control, it's not so great for you. So have a common sense of being able to promote the common good. I think that what you mentioned there was really, really important. Religion is a force for common good. It does bless our nation, it blesses everybody here, but we have important divisions. We've got to find ways to be civil about it. I think that's the important issue.
Just to echo what Jeff said, there's something that legal scholars refer to as the Puritan mistake. We often talk about the Puritans and we say that they came here with religious freedom, which is true, they did. But the reality is they were just doing religious freedom for themselves. And they actually passed laws saying you can have to be a Puritan or get out of Massachusetts. Here's the kicker though. It's not as if it's just Puritans, Protestants, and Catholics. There is not a group in the history of humanity who has not committed a Puritan mistake at one time or another. We've seen atheists to theists, theists to atheists, Jews to Christians, Christians to Jews, Muslims to Christians to Muslims. It goes on and on. And people committed to varying degrees, but it's always a risk. And we have to avoid the Puritan mistake along the lines people have said. The only thing I'll emphasize, because I agree with Jeff, avoiding the Puritan mistake does not mean abandoning who you are and the power of your religious beliefs and what they mean to you. What it does mean is not using the power of government and the power of the state to try to force your beliefs on others or to oppress people with whom you disagree. We have to persuade one another, to proselytize one another, and to convince one another. The power of our examples, for the spirit people feel when they visit with us, the doctrines we teach, for the way we treat them, the examples of our lives. That's how we should be engaging in these conversations without ever abandoning who we are and not using the power of the state to try to amend religious matters.
Super. Thank you. We've got just a minute. If any of you have a question you care to pose to our speakers before we wrap. I only see a hand. I can't see your face from the light. You're going to need to step forward as long as you're standing.
All right. You guys hear me okay?
Now we can.
Okay. There's a great you want to go hard.
along together. So in the spirit of spiritual momentum, I also want to share, how can we get the word out from the actions we did something that just happened today? What can we do to get the word out?
Anyone care to comment? Go ahead, Charles.
Well, and again, just want to say thank you to everybody who participated today, and just the representation, and just the fact that this was an incredible conversation. Just question for those who weren't able to hear it was, what could we do essentially with the momentum that we gained today to be able to make sure that this is heralded, that this is communicated out, just to slow this progress. My encouragement would be that, while we recognize religious freedom as the day, that it becomes honestly a practice in our own lives, and that it shows up in the ways that we engage with people who maybe we have theological or philosophical or political differences with. So internalize that, internally. Beyond that, this will be shared out, through, the city and county of Denver regarding this moment. Again, our continued partnership with the city and county of Denver and the Church of Latter-day Saints. We had an incredible Light the World campaign that raised over $500,000 for local nonprofits in the Denver community. So again, it's faith that works, making sure that people see the unity more than they see the division.
I'll give a practical example. So Craig and I are fishing buddies. I'm evangelical, he's LDS with different significant theological differences, but we'd like to go fishing. I think all of us would like to go fishing. So any of those activities, you want to take us out, we'll go do some stuff. Build relationships through action.
Thanks very much. We are grateful to each of you. Doug, did you have a question, or were you just stretching your back? I've got to go. Okay, good. We're glad to have you. Any way we can get you. We express our gratitude once again to our able and well-versed speakers who are leaders in the community in drawing diverse groups together and helping us all feel united in a common cause for the common good. Please join us again as we express gratitude, or we will be adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, oh, okay. Well, I was like, yeah, I like fishing too. Yeah. Funny. Oh, yeah, no problem. It must be. Thank you. Yeah. I will post it on